Thank you, Tanya, the queen of time. I will, can I get this screen going, if possible? Anyway, I'm extremely thankful to, this is not working. I need the, oh, here now?
Yep.
Okay, good. Discount 30 seconds. I am extremely thankful to you, to Perth, for inviting me. I think it's very generous that such an advanced, successful city invites somebody from developing country cities such as Colombia. Of course, Perth is, it would take us maybe 150 years to have Australia's income per capita. So we are in a different planet. I had thought of presenting a lot of things relative to our experience in Bogota, but after a couple of days here, I think my function is also to present things that are relevant to here, debatable, controversial, different, even though sometimes not necessarily all the, it's still not working. Okay. Okay. I think that one of the things that makes us different from other beings in Earth is that we don't have to accept the world as it is. We can dream and we can change it. But why would we change our city? I would say it's not because we want to make it more sustainable, or it's basically because we want to be happier. And happiness, of course, is very difficult to define. It's impossible to measure, but clearly it's the only thing that really matters. And a city can be very powerful means to provide happiness. I was a graduate student in Paris and I was extremely poor. However, I never was conscious that I was poor at that time. I had Paris. Paris had such an enormous power to provide happiness, well-being, a good city to make you feel well, not to feel inferior. And clearly today, many studies say that to have, beyond a certain point, having more income will not make us happier. But instead, to have a great city at any income, a good city can make people happier. So I think this is the kinds of things that we are talking about today. And I think for millions of years, ants worked, and they know how to make an anthill. They know how to make their habitat. For us, that's not very clear yet. We have made a lot of problems. A great city creates well-being, creates happiness, creates inclusion. For example, I will refer to transport. Can we propose transport solutions if we do not know what kind of city we want? I think it's impossible, because clearly it's very different if what we want is a kind of city like this, or else whether if what we want is something rather like the Netherlands. So do we want Houston or do we want Amsterdam? But even before we know what kind of city model we want, we need to know how do we want to live, because a city is only a means to a way of life. A city model is only a means to a way of life. So actually, even if we are going to talk about something apparently technical such as transport, it really has more to do almost with psychology or almost religion than with engineering. Now, how do we get new ideas for our cities? I will propose that we get new ideas if we look through a lens. Through a lens. If we are looking, for example, through the lens here, I have seen this wonderful art that has been done here, through the lens of beauty, through the lens of art. So we find things if we look through that lens. Or if we look, for example, through the lens of equity. This is what I would look to say the lens of ideology. Ideology is something that is axiomatic. It springs from our heart, from our primordial being. It's not something that can be discussed. It's something that we believe simply that, for example, there should be more equality in society. This is not something, this is axiomatic. And I would propose, for example, some ideological propositions for what a good city should be. A city, as Jan Gehl says, a good city is one where we want to be outside, in the street, in public space, not inside our homes or in a shopping mall. A good city is one where walking is not only safe, but it's a pleasure to walk or to ride a bicycle, which is only a more efficient way of walking. A good city, I mean, we are pedestrian, we are walking animals. We need to walk, not in order to survive. We could survive all our lives inside an apartment. In this theater, maybe the roof could be half as high as it is now. And we could be here, meeting here, but we would feel different. So in the same way, we cannot measure how wide should a footpath be. It's something that we feel in our heart. It's not something we need to be with people. We need to walk to be happy, just as birds need to fly or deer need to run. So a good city is, before anything else, a great city for walking, for seeing people. In a good city, people do not feel inferior. Rich and poor meet in public spaces. A good city is good for vulnerable citizens, for the most vulnerable citizens, for the elderly, for children, for the people on wheelchairs, for example. If it's good for them, it tends to be good for everybody else. In a good city, of course, we have contact with nature, such as you have such amazing contact with nature in Perth. Or a good city is one where we tend to know our neighbors, to meet and to know our neighbors. But all of these are ideological objectives. It's not something that can be measured. It's not something that is learned with technology. It's not something legal. It's something simply that reaches our heart and soul. Now, I think if we do not have our ideological lens, we are not looking for something in particular, it's very difficult to find what is wrong with cities. We tend to be used to the things the way they are. For example, today, it seems to us that it was very obvious what changed in the French Revolution. But it was not so obvious, because 1,000 years had gone by and nobody thought there was anything wrong with this. Sometimes we have very bad things right in front of us, and we do not see them. For example, I don't know if you have seen this gorilla experiment, which I think is very amazing, where they have two teams of 4 people in white shirts and black shirts, and they ask you, count how many passes the people in the white shirts make to each other with some basketballs. And after a minute and a half, they tell you, and did you see the gorilla? And I say, what do you mean the gorilla? And then later they show the video again, and you see some person on a gorilla suit, gorilla mask, goes in the middle of the stage, goes like this and walks out of the screen and says, it's impossible that I didn't see this. But it's possible because simply we were trying to count how many passes were made. And so this is, I think, something that happens to us all the time. Sometimes we have some things that are very wrong, but that we are not looking at them, so we don't see them. So I think in order to find the gorilla, we have to be wearing the gorilla lens. We have to be looking for gorillas or for animals or for something different. And that's what I think I will try to say, that some things that are different, controversial, and I would say as a proposition, that our cities are not just a little wrong. I think they are totally wrong, all our cities. And why are they wrong? Basically, because we are growing in fear of getting killed. It cannot be normal if we tell any 3-year-old child anywhere in the world, watch out, a car. The child will jump in fright, and with a good reason, because tens of thousands of children are killed by cars every year in the world. But what is amazing is that we think this is normal, that this is progress, and so I think maybe we have yet to find, there may be many other problems with cities, but just that one. It cannot be normal that we have created environments where we are threatened, and it's not any minor threat, it's a threat of being killed. I think we need a totally radical change of paradigm. We don't really know yet how, but hopefully I think in 200 years, people will say, how could people live in those horrible 2015 cities? The same way we think London 1800 was horrible, and yet at that time it was the most admired city in the planet. Now, what is wrong with our cities again? Is saying we tell any child anywhere in the world, watch out a car, and he's dead in fright. Now, there is a conflict for space in cities. The most crucial resource in a city is road space, the most crucial material resource. So there is a conflict between people and cars for this very valuable resource. Let's look, for example, at cities through the lens of equality. We cannot have equality today, income equality. The whole world has accepted that the best way to manage most of society's resources is private property and the market. But that necessarily generates income inequality. It needs inequality for the market to work. Some people must make more money, some others less, some companies succeed, other companies fail. So what kind of equality can we have today? And I will mention this because I think this has a lot to do with cities. First, I think we can have democratic equality. This means the first article of all constitutions say all citizens are equal before the law. I don't know the Australian constitution, but I'm sure it says that. If this is true, this is not just poetry. If this is true, for example, it's clear that a bus with 80 passengers has a right to 80 times more road space than a car with one. Or somebody in a bicycle has the same right to road space as somebody in a Rolls Royce. Also, if all citizens are equal, then public good prevails over private interest. And so if something needs to be done that benefits the majority, even though it affects a few, such as, for example, we should never have private waterfronts in a city, for example. And I would also say another kind of equality that we can have is quality of life equality. We can have, even with the most radical capitalism, we could have quality of life equality, especially for children, that all children should have access beyond health and education, access to green, access to sports facilities, to swimming pools, to music lessons. So I mention this because much of this can be achieved by a great city. A good city can construct a lot of this new kind of non-income equality. If we look at Earth from space, it looks that we are so close together. Everybody, there is such solidarity until we get down here, and then we see there is not so much love and peace. That, for example, for a Colombian, it's very difficult. You would know it's very difficult to get a visa to come to Australia, for example. You don't have a right to go to the whole planet. Some countries may be very generous to you to allow you to come in for a few days, but you don't have a right to go to the whole planet. The only place in the world you have the right to be is in your own country. But even within your own country, all of this is private property. And if you go in, you may get even killed in your own city. You go, and then if you go into private property, you may get killed. And if you go into the street, you may get killed as well. So why all this long story? Just to say, out of the whole universe, out of the whole planet, the only real microscopic piece of the world to which we have right of access is public pedestrian space in our city. This is an extremely important part of our world, public pedestrian space. And when we are talking about great cities, really the most important thing we're talking about is public pedestrian space. How to make public pedestrian space better. We can discuss what better means, but basically it has to be a place that is safe, pleasant, comfortable, fun, all of these things that many wonderful experts have talked about, architects, urbanists, etc. But there is a big political debate about this, because try to get some more space for pedestrians and take space away from cars to see if it's easy. Now, What happens is when shopping malls replace public pedestrian space as a meeting place for people, I would say is a symptom that a city is ill. And unfortunately, this is what is happening in many places all over the world, especially the developing world. People really go to the mall not even to buy, they just go to walk, to have a coffee, to have an ice cream, because they are safe spaces with no risk of getting killed by a car. But, of course, if you come to a new city you don't know and you ask the concierge at the hotel, tell me what is a nice place to go to, and then the concierge tells you, go to the shopping mall. Of course, because shopping malls are the same all over the world. With globalization, all the shops are the same. The temperature is kept the same all over. You don't know if you are in Moscow winter or in tropical Perth in the summer. You don't see the vegetation, you don't see anything. So clearly, and of course it's not a democratic place. I, as a politician, have been kicked out by police out of several shopping malls trying to do some political activities. So we need people in the public spaces, such as this wonderful pedestrian street here in Perth. In pedestrian spaces are totally different, where rich and poor meet as equals, because malls also are designed, some for the higher income people, some for lower income people. Now, there is, I would propose, one of the crucial issues in our time, one of the crucial ideological and political issues in our time, is how to distribute road space. Road space, as I said, I think I propose to you, is the most valuable resource a city has. We could find oil or diamonds under Perth, and it would not be as valuable as road space. The question is how to distribute this road space between pedestrians, bicyclists, public transport, and private cars. There is nothing legal about it. You will not find a law that tells you how to do it. There is nothing technical about it. You will not find some engineer who will tell you how to do it. This is an ideological and political decision, and I think one of the most crucial decisions towards the future, and I will try to mention a couple of the controversial issues relating to this. Here, for example, in London, we see this street that has much more space for pedestrians than for motor vehicles. It's not because the mayor of London asked permission to a transport engineer to do this. This is a political decision. Now, we should remember, again, that when we distribute road space, a child has the same right to road space as a Rolls-Royce owner. Why not give pedestrians and bicyclists, for example, more space, the space taken today by parked cars? Who decided we should give parked cars this space? Did somebody vote? Did somebody decide? Or we just assume? I mean, I think it's important to remember, I don't know the Australian Constitution, but parking is not a constitutional right. The fact that you buy a car does not give government any obligation to provide you parking. In the same way that if you buy a refrigerator, it does not give government the obligation to provide you an apartment. So if government gets rid of parking somewhere, and then people will go to the mayor and says, now where will I park? That's what is the most difficult thing for a mayor to do, let me tell you, is to get rid of one parking space. And then people will go so mad to the mayor and say, now where will I park? So the mayor can tell them, it's the same as if you come and ask me where you should put your food or your clothes. This is not my problem, you know? You can park. But this is easier said than done. Now, let's go. Change is difficult. And this, I will give you an example of this and relating to parking, and politically costly. Before this story, I will tell you about footpaths. I used to have black hair. Now, footpaths, I think, is the most important infrastructure of a democratic city. What makes a difference between an advanced and a backward city is not subways or highways, is quality footpaths. You will find horrible things like this in any developing country city, you big, horrible, useless flyover and no footpath. But this is not difficult to find in developing country cities. All over, you could find it very easily. So, what this shows is not a lack of footpath. What this shows is that people in cars are first-class citizens, and people who walk are third-class citizens. What this picture shows is lack of democracy. And this is an extremely, this is very common. You will think it's funny. Even cars are more important than children, than even children. China is very wealthy, but it's mostly a disaster in most of its cities. Bogota was and still is, to a large degree, a mess. Cars parked on all sidewalks. When I became mayor, maybe there was not a single block in the whole city where a person on a wheelchair could go from one corner to the other. So we took thousands of cars off the sidewalks. And people told me, Mayor, you are so stubborn. Because there is enough space to have cars parked there as well as for people to walk by. So we had to explain to them on some TV commercial that even though we think footpaths are relatives of streets because they live next to each other, in fact, footpaths are not for getting from one place to another as streets. They are for talking, for playing, for kissing, for doing business. Footpaths really are relatives of parks or plazas. And it's as absurd to say that there is enough space in footpaths for people to walk by, as well as for cars to be parked, as it would be to say that we can turn the main park or the main plaza in a city into an open-air parking lot, so long as we leave enough space between cars for people to walk by. Again, we are into something very subjective, something that you feel with your heart. It's not something that you can measure. So this is the kind of battles that we did, a lot of getting out of thousands of cars and making sidewalks, making footpaths. I was almost impeached. I mean, it was very, see, this is, you can see here, the blue is the negative, the blue line, they say Peñalosa there. I had 77% negative image, public enemy. It's easy to say here, I had to send my daughter, the 11-year-old daughter, to live in Canada with my brother because it was horrible. Happily, in the end, I ended up with a very high positive image, but all of these things are difficult everywhere in the world. All I'm saying is, regardless, this is an example for Colombia, maybe irrelevant for Perth or for anywhere. What I am trying to say is that, of course, we have to get as much people participation as possible to get to persuade, to convince, but in the end, if government wants to change, we must assume political cost. New ideas are never born with majority support. And always there will be some powerful groups who oppose different ideas. Now we made a lot of sidewalks, big footpaths. How big should they be? As big as possible. It's not a measure. This is in Berlin, of course, not Bogota or London or Paris. Now, are protected bikeways a cute architectural feature, or are they a right? I think today we agree that to have a footpath is a right. In a civilized country like Australia, if somebody gets hit by a car in a place where there is not a footpath for any given reason, I'm sure they are able to sue government and get a lot of money because they are assumed to have a right. The question is, are protected bikeways in every street a right? I would say so, unless we think only those with access to a motor vehicle have a right to individual mobility without the risk of getting killed. And for example, a 12-year-old, the only possible individual mobility they have besides walking is a bicycle. So I hope that in the future we will get to the concept that a protected bikeway in every street is as much a right as a footpath. But of course, bicycles need infrastructure for people to use them, such as this in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Bogota, much before it was in vogue, because there were bikeways in London, in Paris, there were bikeways in the Netherlands and Denmark, but in 1998 there were no bikeways in London or in Paris or in Madrid or in New York. So it was very crazy to do this. It's very easy to tell this story. We built a lot of bikeways, and we went from almost zero bikers to more than 700,000 today. which is still very little because it's only like 7%. Our city is 8 million inhabitants. So in Bogota, well, let's go quickly. In the poorest neighborhood, sometimes we made this like libraries. I would not have time to go into this now, but now. In developing countries, a protected bikeway, I would say, is as much important because it protects the cyclist as it is because it is a symbol that shows that a citizen on a $30 bicycle is equally important to one on a $30,000 car. It raises the social status of the cyclist because otherwise the poor people feel ashamed to use a bicycle because it's like a symbol of being the poorest of the poor. And so, for example, this guy feels very important in his bikeway. In very advanced societies, this doesn't happen, but now, I would ask you, is there, for example, any justification to have infrastructure, like roads, allowing cars to travel from A to B on a given city in a more shorter route than a bicycle? I mean, for example, when we do highways through the cities, which I think we will talk about this a little later, we do everything. I mean, demolish, put highways underground or whatever to make the shortest way from A to B. But bicyclists, we assume they're going for the fun of it. So you can, you know. So this is, again, a question of democracy. It's a matter of principles where the bicyclists should have the shortest distance as well, at least as short, if not shorter than what cars can do. Now, I would propose to you that urban highways are like poisonous rivers. People cannot be near them. People cannot cross them. They lower the values of housing around them. So, would you like to live right next to this highway? It's the typical NIMBY. You want them, but not too near your home. Somebody else's home is okay. Now, much better than highways are avenues, boulevards, like this Champs-Élysées in Paris, one of the most attractive pedestrian spaces in the planet. Millions of tourists go from all over the world, but Champs-Élysées is not a pedestrian promenade. Champs-Élysées has 10 car lanes. So what is the difference between a highway and an avenue? First, it has traffic lights. People can cross it. It has big 20-meter sidewalks, has trees, has shops, has buildings. So actually, this giant car street does not lower values around it. On the contrary, it increases values. And when you say, oh, we'll have much more cars moving through it, but actually most urban highways in the world get jammed. So the amount of cars you move on an avenue or in a highway is basically the same. And even if the highway is operating well, you will move about 50% of the people on an avenue, which is still, but clear you don't do damage, you don't destroy the city. I would say that some of the challenges for the next few decades is either to put highways underground and to make parks above them for the next 100 years or 200, whatever. I don't know how quickly can we do it, as they have been doing in some cities already, or to transform highways in avenues to make them more like an avenue is now. In Bogota, every Sunday, we have an interesting experiment. Bogota is a very dense city, one of the most dense cities in the world. And we close more than 120 kilometers of main arteries. We call it ciclovia, and we get 1.5 million people every Sunday, riding bicycles, jogging. I would say it's a beautiful ritual of citizens reconquering the city for human beings. It's an exercise that doesn't cost much at all. Now, in a referendum that we held in October, we asked for people to vote to have a car-free day every year. So the first Thursday of every February in Bogota, we have this 8 million inhabitant city with no private cars, zero. Only taxis, of course. We want the city to work, trucks, buses, We don't want the city to collapse. So this is why we put it on a Thursday and not a Friday, so that they would not be turned into a long weekend. 99.9% of the people go to work and to study as usual. And as the majority of people goes by public transport anyway, for the majority of people, even those who go by car, which that they have to go by public transport, they have shorter travel times. But it's a very interesting experiment. And of course, since this would have been changed back a long time ago, but since it was voted by the people themselves, it cannot be changed by the president, it cannot be changed by Congress. The only way to change it again is to do another referendum. So it's a very interesting exercise that we do to prove maybe to a new way of going into a different city. The next step that we want to do is to have, for every day, to ban car use every day during an hour and a half or 2 peak hour in the morning, an hour and a half peak hour in the afternoon. So that at least during those 2 hours, or 1 hour and a half, people in public transport, in buses, in bicycles, will be able to go very safely, very fast. And then the people in cars, if they want to go later or before, it's okay. Now, anyway, that's the car-free day in Bogota. Now, I will propose to you that mobility solutions are not a question of matter of technology or money. It's mostly a matter of equity. Can you give me a reason? I mean, this is a typical developing country city highway. You know, this is a highway despite you have vendors in the street. This is in Mexico City. But this is typical in any developing world city. Is there any rational or democratic reason not to have exclusive busways on this road? Would not be a little more intelligent? Now, as I mentioned this before, look, I will propose to you again, as in the gorilla case, that sometimes we have horrible things before our noses, but we do not see them because we are looking through a different lens. For example, let's not go to the French Revolution. Less than 90 years ago, women could not vote. Women could not vote, not in Australia only, or in Colombia. They could not vote in France, or in Britain, or in the United States. And it was not Nazis who thought women should not vote. Everybody thought it was perfectly normal that women should not vote. Poets, artists thought it was fine that women should not vote. Now, it's clear to say, we see this is such a horrible thing. 90 years ago, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers. So, I would propose to you that a bus in traffic is almost as absurd, because clearly, if we have democracy, a bus should never be stuck in traffic. A bus should always have an exclusive lane. So a bus stuck in traffic is almost as absurd, as undemocratic as having women not voting. Now, we're looking, and also I would not say just democracy. It doesn't take a PhD from MIT. A committee of 12-year-old children would find in 20 minutes that the most efficient way to use scarce road space is with exclusive lanes for buses. Of course, we needed mass transit for our system, but the rail systems were very expensive. So we copied a system that they had invented in the small Brazilian city of Curitiba, and we improved it somehow, and we call this system. This system is moving today more passengers our direction than all subways in the world, except for 5 or 6. Almost 50,000 passengers our direction. One of these bus lanes moves as much as 40 car lanes. Even when the street in the downtown, the people told us, look, the street is very narrow. We cannot put the bus system there. We said, yes, the street is very narrow. But since we are in a democracy, what goes out is cars. So it's only a road for buses in the center of the city. This is in other cities, like in Istanbul. There are hundreds of cities all over the world now that have these systems. I would say that when we are talking about a BRT, it's a totally different animal than a regular bus service. The capacity, everything is the difference, I say, like between a mouse and a kangaroo. Totally different. So a BRT is more like a subway with buses. So it's important, for example, to have at the stations overpasses for the express buses. So some buses stop at every station and some others stop only every 10 stations, for example. This is in Guangzhou, in China, a 12 million inhabitant city, which is moving as many passengers our direction as the most heavily used subway lines in China. The Transmilenio in Bogotá moves more passengers our direction than all subway lines in China or in Europe. Now, let's go quickly. Most people who want underground subways usually have not the slightest intention of using them. Especially in the developing world. They just want other people to use them so they think they will have less traffic in this way. You know? This is not a very pleasant thing. When you do it once or twice, or you go for a week to London or to Paris, it's okay. But if you have to do it every day of your life, during 40 years, I can assure you, it's not so much fun. You know, why public transport users are social heroes? I think first we should give them natural right, surface, rail, or buses, not put them on. These guys are going to the center of the earth in Stockholm, you know? It's every day of your life, you know? I mean, even if you have an underground subway, you should have a BRT on top. It's a right. It's a right for you to be able to have the fastest possible way of public transport on the surface. Now, I would ask, trams are very cute, you know? They're very beautiful, you know? But what do they do? You know, the highest light rail, the light rail with the highest use in the planet does not have 1/5 of what we are moving in the Transmilenio system in Bogotá. If you want, but people love trams. And so if you want them, it's beautiful. I love trams, beautiful surface transport, very stable. You have a view. As long as you know you are paying a lot more money for something that's basically the same. But it's the same. If you would like to buy a Lamborghini, it's okay. Fine, I respect that very much as you know that basically that's the same thing as a Hyundai, and that you have even less people can fit in it, but it's okay. Now, sometimes they say trams are going to be such stimulus to urban development. There is not a single study that proves that this is true, that trams will create, for example, this is in Portland. Portland is the most famous trams in the US, and they still have a lot of empty parking lots along the tram line. And the highest used tram line in Portland does not even move 1/10 of the passengers that the BRT in Bogotá moves. And this is, for example, another proof. One of the earliest trams in the United States is this one in Salt Lake City. And still, Salt Lake City, even though it has 20 years with trams, it looks like a bombed-out city, like it had come out 5 or 10 years ago from a war. The whole center is full of parking lots, no urban development. But again, I love trams. It's surface public transport, fine. As long as we know we are paying a lot more for something that's basically the same. Now, we should remember that what gives speed and capacity to transport system is not whether the wheels are metal or rubber. It's exclusive corridors without obstacles. Like here, we have this bus here, and it's waiting at the traffic light. Of course, it cannot have the same speed and the same capacity as a rail that has no obstacles whatsoever. So, we are talking about what gives capacity is the exclusive right-of-way. This is an interesting study I invite you to look at. We are not going to go into the details, but there is a study a month and a half ago in England, came out. I have the references here, and by the Institute of Economic Affairs, we say they are even proposing something heretical. They are proposing that some of the trains going into London should be taken out and put buses on the rail tracks. And this is in Britain, a month and a half, and this is the references, you can look at this. They said that this is I leave it there for somebody who may be interested. Of course, I know that I was being told by Peter Newman that what I was saying was completely mad. But this is an interesting discussion. This study says there is strong evidence that allowing some commuter railways in London to be converted into busways would provide higher capacity at lower cost. It says the same study, the combination because buses, for example, they can get out, they can go near where people live on regular streets, and once they enter the rail corridor, they have basically the same speed. Also, you can have, of course, in long distances, trains are much faster without stop. But if you have frequent stops, the speed is similar. Also, buses can change lanes without people having to get on and off. The frequencies are higher. I mean, We don't have time to go into this, but this is just to invite you to think different. Of course, I'm not proposing you should take out the beautiful trains you have. But for the future, for other routes, for new lines, it may be interesting. When I got here, I saw they were making some big, had some trucks in the middle of the highway. The bulldozers were making some works. And I was very happy because I thought they were going to make more of the wonderful bus lanes that you already have. And the taxi driver told me, no, they are making a bigger highway. Now, so this is some of the buses they have been put in rail lines. But anyway, this is just to say different controversial things. Now, one thing that we should remember is that very soon, buses will be driverless. I mean, cars will be driverless, but even much before cars will be driverless, buses on exclusive lanes will be driverless, and electric. So it's just a matter of arithmetic, mathematics, to discuss this thing. This is more than ideology or discussion. Now, the more important discussion, whether than you have buses or trains or trams, is density. We clearly cannot have high frequency, low cost. I mean, if Bogota, my city, had this kind of structure, we will have 20 times the area we have now with the same population. So clearly, distances on average will be 20 times more. It would cost 20 times more, and you cannot have high frequency, you cannot have low cost. So much more important for transport than discussing whether we want trains or buses or whatever, is that we have compact cities. With a compact city, everything works well. Trams, buses, subways, bicycles, taxis, everything. Now, high density, efficient mobility. High density does not mean 50-story high buildings. Clearly, more road infrastructure will not solve traffic jams. We are not going to go into this story everybody knows, but however, some people must think it does, because they are making bigger highways here in Perth at this moment. But why doesn't it do it? It's important to understand why is it that never bigger road infrastructure solves traffic. Because what creates traffic is not the number of cars, it's the number of trips and the length of trips. If you make more roads, bigger roads, people will make longer trips and more trips. And worse so, people will go live farther, work farther. And so you have longer trips and more traffic. And so clearly the city will expand farther. Everybody since I came here tells me, oh, it's a bad problem, Perth is so extended, 100 kilometers, 120 kilometers, blah, blah. But those who are deciding whether Perth expands more in low density is not the planning offices. It's the people who make the roads. As you make bigger roads, you are making Perth even lower density spread farther away. I am not going to say whether if you want this, it's okay, but we have, I'm just saying this is a clear consequence of that. Traffic is not such a bad thing. I mean, we don't have to go rushing to solve traffic jams when we have. If we want cities to be more compact and for people to use more public transport, traffic may be a great thing. If people it can go much faster by public transport. And if you have a lot of traffic, people will want to live closer to where they work. Of course, there is only one problem, which is distribution trucks, but they may have to go by night. Now, I would say that Australia's greatest challenge for the 21st century is to turn the inner suburbs into high-density environments, to have denser cities. But then you may have to demolish houses in order to make higher-rise buildings. Of course, this is sacrilege. People think this is terrible, but the issue is, why do people go to the suburbs? It's not because they are dumb. They are seeking some things that they like. So is it possible, perhaps, to give them what they want in a dense environment, such as relatively traffic-free streets for children to ride bicycles, or to give them green, but with higher densities? Is it possible? I think this is the great challenge, to create dense cities which will provide people what they like in the suburbs. Lower-cost houses, a lot of green, hundreds of kilometers of streets only for bicycles. You could demolish all of these houses and then to put up buildings looking apart. I think normally a park is much better if it has 15-story high buildings around it than if it has houses in it. no, we don't want that necessarily. That's not what we want for Perth. But neither the suburbs nor Hong Kong or nor Manhattan. Is it possible to create cities with a lot of green but higher density? You have so many parks. I mean, I wish in Bogota we had 1/50th of the parks you have in Australian cities. You were such geniuses, the people in the past who designed or who saved those land for parks. But so this makes it very easy to have the higher densities because you will have parks with more people. Even again, in a book by Jan Gehl, he said that how they found that even in parks, these benches that were most used were those where most people walked by. Even in parks, when people go to nature, they want to see people. Now, cities where you would crisscross the city through greenways, going from one side to the other with no cars. This is an interesting experiment in the Netherlands, in Houten. You can go across the city only by bicycle, no cars. In Vancouver, I mean, but if high density is not achieved in the inner suburbs, where is it to be achieved? 100 kilometers from the center of Perth? Of course, this house, for example, you say it overlooks the water. I understand, I was taken by these beautiful neighborhoods in Perth. This, I'm told, is like a $10 million house. But clearly, either people cannot see the water from the street anyway. So if you will have a 15-story high building there, you could have a lot more people watching, being near the city. And now here they sold this one, I understand, for 18 million Australian dollars. Nice place to have a 20-story high-rise building or something. But no, they can only put 2 houses in it. I'm sure to say that they could demolish some of these houses to put higher rises sin. But this is an interesting social discussion. I don't know whether we should allow people in the neighborhood to decide the planning rules. Should people, who decides over what to do in Central Park? The rich people who live next to it, or is the whole society? But this is an interesting democratic discussion. Who should decide on these issues? Now, this is another time I was in Perth about 8 years ago. So you see, you have the center very near here, and they are making these very relatively low-rise developments, even though it's very near the center. Now, more important than the height of buildings is what happens when they reach the ground. Clearly, this is a very famous architect, Frank Gehry, but it's not a pleasant thing to walk next to these blind windows. Maybe from inside they are watching you, but from outside you cannot see anything, Very famous architect, I respect him, has beautiful things, but I don't think this is very good for the street. This is more fun. Shops, windows, that seems to be a lot more fun. How high is this building? 3-story high or 40-story high? Who cares? The fact is that it's a great footpath, has shops in it, has trees. So anyway, this is a discussion, of course, that is very ideological as well. Everything about cities is ideological. It's not like there is no truth or false here. Now, of course, we have thieves, even in New York, so people have to put bars. Maybe here in Perth you don't have many thieves. In Bogota we do have a lot, and so we have a lot of bars. Now, I will propose the following. The measure of anything we do in a city, a building, a road, anything that we do, the measure of whether it's good or bad is how much does it improve pedestrian space around it. If we make a new road, a new building, does it become more attractive, more fun to be there next to it, to talk there, to play there, to kiss there? That's the measure of anything that we are going to do in the city in the future, anything that we decide to do. How much more pleasant to be around it does it become? Clearly, this is not a very pleasant place to be, in these new areas of Perth or these parked cars, these people who have these companies, they have these horrible parking lots there, this narrow sidewalk next to a high-velocity road. I would prefer much better to have 20-story high building and to have a giant sidewalk, a footpath, but anyway, this is just discussion. Now, you have some we don't have waterfronts. You have such a treasure. We don't have water in Bogota. You know? So the Japanese gave us a study, a transport study, which proposed elevated highways all over the city. We decided not to do elevated highways and, for example, to do a greenway crisscrossing the city. This was a 35-kilometer greenway from the richest to the poorest areas, where the Japanese had proposed a highway. And so we put this greenway, and I think we could have thousands of kilometers of this, more and more. Even though Bogota is very dense, as you see, it's a very poor city. It goes out of the city to the countryside, the greenway. Waterfronts provide so much joy and such unique, they're a treasure that they should never be private and exclusive. And Perth has a great example. Perth is wonderful in this. I always see the Long Island Sound in the United States, for example, is totally private. Private, expensive houses. Here I see something very democratic, beautiful, very generous. Even in the richest neighborhoods, they have a lot of public space, public waterfront, public access. This is a treasure. This is nothing like this in the Long Island Sound, where the rich don't allow people. It's just one little park every 100 miles or something like this. Nothing like this that you have in Perth. This is democracy at work. The $20 million houses and the public pedestrian walkway right next to them. This is very unique in the world. My respects. Now, you know, parks in the waterfront, a lot of them in the waterfront, in the richest neighborhoods. This is very unique. Very unique. Congratulations. All over the world, people, after the 1940s, 50s, they put highways next to the rivers. Engineers love to put highways on the waterfronts because before the waterfronts were the bad parts of the city, and if you need a little more land, you just do a little infill. So they did this horrible highway in Paris, and they regretted, of course. They have turned already part of this into pedestrian. They make this Paris splash every year. They don't have Perth beaches, so they close it for a month. I don't know if they still do it. They did it with the last mayor. Every 1 month every year, and they put some sand, some palm trees, and people go there to the Paris beach. It's not the Perth beach, but something. Now, here is, of course, the famous story of Seoul, how they demolished this highway, and just because they had some little water underneath. I mean, this is what the waterfront of Seoul, you know, it's not exactly Perth River or Perth Ocean, but that's what they have. Now, in Boston, they invested $20 billion to put these highways underground because they were in front of the waterfront. And you have so many highways near the waterfronts. It's too bad because you have so many, you are not conscious of how valuable they are. Urban waterfronts need pedestrian infrastructure, ideally without cars next to them. Like here in New York. New York has some horrible highways next to the water, but in this place it's okay. Pedestrian and the houses next to it. Or in Sydney, pedestrian and the houses, the road behind. Or in Italy. Or in here there was a road next to the buildings. The road was closed in San Sebastián in Spain and put back so that you would not have any cars next to the water. This is where the road for cars used to be, became totally pedestrian in San Sebastián. More New York. In Bogotá, we don't have a lake or anything, so we have drainage canals. That's our waterfront for the river. And still people love to ride bicycles, and so we made some pedestrian spaces along the drainage canals, our ocean, you know. Architects can do wonderful things. They can transform a drainage canal in a very poor neighborhood into, oh, what happened there? Into a nice pedestrian promenade. Even so, but just to say, we even created some lakes, artificial, I mean, where there was a swamp or a wetland. Now, because I heard when this leader at the beginning mentioned swamp, there was here. Because now the politically correct word is wetland, you know. But anyway, swamp or wetland, it had been infilled, so we were able to recover and to create this. This is to create this little lake, you know. It's a joke next to what you have in some poor neighborhoods. now, this is a picture I saw at the Sydney Museum, because they were saying how crazy they were in 1940 to put cars next to Bondi Beach in Sydney. Cars. But then they were like saying, I mean, people were so crazy about cars, they were crazy, and they put cars on the beach in Sydney. Of course, now Bondi Beach has the cars much farther away from the water. But here in Perth, they are still next to the water. So, how about if Perth would have 50 kilometers of pedestrian street next to the water without cars, and the cars maybe 1 or 2 blocks behind? But this is, you have a lot of cars on the beach, parking lots on the beach. Such an amazing beach. When I see this, I say, my God, I wish we had 500 meters of what they have. But you have 100 kilometers of this, and then you have roads for cars and parking lots and things. So, anyway. Now, let's go quickly. I will just finish proposing that maybe we have to do, I was telling you that we have to think of totally different cities, totally different. Maybe take half the space from our roads and turn it into just pedestrian. Half the space. Some crazy things, I mean, because we clearly need to live in a different way. It cannot be normal. If we want people to come downtown, to live downtown, and then their children will walk out into the street full of traffic. So I would just propose a couple of ingredients, 2 little ingredients that could be interesting for the future of cities, the new areas that are going to be built. Why not a city of hundreds of kilometers of roads only for buses? And if you like trams, fine, I don't care. Buses or trams. And bicycles. And pedestrians, only, no cars. This would be so easy if we design the new area of the city. We could turn maybe some roads that already exist into this, and just to have access for the people who live there in their cars, but no more. But the new areas of the city, at least, it'd be so easy to incorporate things like this. It is in the Netherlands, or greenways, crisscrossing the city with bus lanes or trams, hundreds of kilometers. It'd be so easy, doesn't cost anything. It's a fantastic public transport, very low cost. Why not a city crisscross hundreds of kilometers to go across a city by a greenway without cars next to it on a bicycle highway, across the city, hundreds crisscrossing. How about a city where every other street would be pedestrian? One pedestrian, the next street for cars. One pedestrian. I mean, when cars appeared, cities totally changed. There is a wonderful book by Peter Norton called Fighting Traffic in the United States. It's wonderful In 1900, nobody was killed by cars in the United States. There were no cars. 1900. Only 20 years later, between 1920 and 1930, more than 200,000 people were killed by cars in the United States. Only in 1925, more than 8,000 children were killed by cars. So something had completely changed. We should have done completely different cities. But no, we just continue as if nothing had happened. We just made bigger roads, and that's it. And I think we went wrong. I think we have to rethink this whole thing. I don't know exactly for the young people, for the artists who are here, who will have to think what to do in the future. This is on a couple of ideas, but there may be many, many, many more. To have greenways crisscrossing cities in all directions, bicycle highways. This is something that we did in Bogota, these greenways crisscrossing, we did in our small mayoral term, almost 70 kilometers of these bicycle highways. This is a bicycle highway where the city was growing. This is another one which is about 24 kilometers long, in very poor neighborhoods where there were not even sewage. We put sewage, we put water, schools, community centers, parks, no pavement in the streets. We have money for that. But for the pedestrian highway, we did. Even underground cables for the lights, trees. It's a totally different way of structuring the city. See, when the city is just growing to get there, just going to grow there, I mean, of course, we should do much better than this, but we only had 3 years in City Hall, so we did this. And then the city grows around it. See? A bicycle highway, then you can go faster by bicycle than by car. Very poor people. But this shows respect for citizens. This says you are important, not because you have money or a PhD, but because you have a Colombian identity card in your pocket or because you are a human being. So even these very illegal neighborhood slums that we first improve them, and first we put the roads for bicycles, and then later we would pay the part for cars. See here you see the car on the left is in the mud, and the pedestrians have this very nice, almost luxury pedestrian and bicycle highway. This is a symbol constructing equity. And the highway, then the city grows around the places where it was not. I'm sorry. And I like to show you, for example, I just took, like 2 weeks ago, just went there to see how this is working. And this is interesting how this, and remember 15 years ago, nobody used bicycles, and now it's traffic in this bicycle highway. In some of the poorest areas, I mean, it would take, it's like a different planet that we are talking from Perth to this, and still is a high quality bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Most of those bicycles are not even $40 worth. And most of the streets around there are not even paved yet. Some, yes, of course, but this is a different way of organizing cities, and doesn't cost anything. It's nothing very genial. It's just a little bit of imagination and political decision and planning. And then life is organized in a totally different way. Bicycle taxis and now. So, and to see, we did great schools. Since we did not spend the money in highways, so we had a lot of money to do libraries, schools, parks. This is the bicycle highway. See, the architects here on the left, buildings that they were housing on the left, they found their diploma in a tamal, you know, because they did not put windows looking the greenway, you know. But I'm sure in a few years these things will be demolished and we'll have better architecture there. But anyway, this is the traffic. This is so we could have cities with hundreds of kilometers of greenways crisscrossing. And you should be able to crisscross the city in every direction through a greenway, a bicycle highway without cars next to you. And this is something, for example, that would be a nice ingredient for the new city to have. So I will just say to you who are creators, who are imagining, who are here because that every time you see anything in a city that you like, it was never the city that did it. The cities don't do anything. It was somebody who imagined it. A group of people, some people who worked maybe 6 months, years, decades, who were able to achieve that thing to happen. And again, you will have to have many difficult battles for anything that is really worthwhile. Very difficult. I like this, I end with this one phrase by Gandhi, which I love, because he says, first they ignore you when you are saying different crazy things. Then they laugh at you, they mock you. Then they fight you, and then you win. Thank you.